Interesting times indeed, my friends. Today, I want to address a very interesting podcast episode created by Patrick Bet-David, the owner and creator of Valuetainment. First and foremost, this debate was between Christians and Muslims. It was a religious discussion that got very heated at times, and there was a lot of back and forth of attacking each other based on the differences between the two religions. First and foremost, I want to start by stating I am a huge supporter of the work that Patrick David is doing. I think he's done a phenomenal job in the last few years. I've been watching his journey, his evolution, and he inspires me in many ways, and I hope to one day maybe knock out a podcast with him, and I'm pretty sure I will by the will of God. I think he's done some extraordinary things as far as debates, what's going on in the world, politics, and I believe he probably will be targeted eventually for these open discussions he's having by the machine. He might get accused for something he never did, or will be very hard to prove that he did. It seems in modern times, anyone that seems to question the status quo, miraculously charges appear out of nowhere 20 years later by so-called victims, and I am not downplaying that. I'm not saying these things didn't happen, but there seems to be a common denominator of any alpha male who seems to question what's going on in the world, why certain policies are being made, and miraculously a few months later, a year later, they're all charged with something that allegedly happened 20 years ago. And I think the common denominator here is that all of these people like Russell Brand, Andrew Tate, and again, I'm not saying they're innocent, but prove that they're guilty before you destroy their lives, their reputations, and whatnot. So we live in a time that is very volatile. Free speech is very important. And I think people that are trying to stifle free speech are using very strong and creative methods of silencing any opposition. So I would also like to send this message out to all the strong women out there who are championing free speech, who are trying to, support this open dialogue that's very important to have. And if we live in a free society, if we do not have free speech and the ability to have open debates, especially about issues that are very important to our lives, shutting down the world, what we stick into our bodies, dictated by people that govern us, and whatnot, then we don't live in a free society. So I would beg the women that are out there that are brave enough to be in the public stage, to be on the stage of the world, who are willing to speak up and ask questions and have these conversations like people like Patrick Bet-David, like Russell Brand, and many other content creators who have come under some really weird and horrible things happening to them. I would hope that women would really be vocal right now to have these conversations, because they won't be able to use that method on you, ladies. We need you. You are our equals. We may be different in physical terms, but we are equal before the eyes of God. And I know I went off a little subject here, but if you're getting this message, this is an SOS to the strong women that are out there. A lot of men who are questioning the status quo of what's going on in the world seem to come under attack for things that supposedly happened in their past. They get dropped from all these different things. They can't speak no more. And those important conversations that they're having are silenced. And those conversations are beneficial to all of us. We need to be able to ask questions and have deep discussions. And that's why the work of people like Patrick Bet-David is extremely important. Getting back to this debate happened a few days ago. They brought on some Christians and some Muslims and some former Muslims who became Christian, which in my opinion wasn't the right way to start this whole thing. As someone who has championed the unity of all people of the Abrahamic faiths, I was not happy in the sense that I don't feel that these debates were productive to bringing the two groups together, but rather they were more of defend who's right and wrong here, instead of us focusing on what we have the same, which is pretty much everything except the concept of who Jesus Christ was. Was he really God or the Son of God in a three-part system? Or was he just a prophet sent along with all the other prophets, as the Muslims claim? That is the only true difference in the doctrine between these two faiths. All the faiths believe in charity, doing the right thing, having mercy, the forgiveness of God, doing better and being more humble towards your fellow human beings. Yes, they want to point out certain things that have happened in history, but they are always out of context. And that goes for both. Whether they're quoting the Bible or the Quran, if we take things out of context without painting the whole picture, the whole mosaic, if you just see one tile, you're not going to see the whole picture in the mosaic. It is important when these debates are happening that people that are, first of all, qualified to speak about it, second of all, are allowed to respond to each and every claim back and forth. But again, overall, I wasn't too satisfied with these debates because I believe that they were more counterproductive to creating unity, which is really the goal right now. I want to remind everyone that's Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, your ideals, what they should be based on your, traditions, you couldn't have more in common at a time where the whole world is becoming very chaotic, very irrational, and these ways of life are all in danger right now. These ways of life, right, lifestyle choices, whether you're a Christian, Jew, or Muslim, are under attack. What you can teach your children, what they're forcing down their throats. This country was founded on religious freedom. And this country is supposed to protect the First Amendment right to free speech and people being able to practice their faith. We cannot force certain lifestyles on certain individuals, and that goes every direction. So first we have to put in context the United States of America, where a certain faith may not accept the lifestyle choice of another individual. It does not mean that you agree with that lifestyle or you want to promote it, but you do accept that you live in a country that is not a Christian country anymore, unfortunately, a Muslim country or a Jewish country, that the doctrine of the United States of America is everyone has a right to follow what they believe or don't believe. So we have to tolerate each other. And this has been the most tolerant in many ways compared to all the countries that have come throughout history. As far as, again, we made many mistakes in the United States of America, slavery and racism and all that stuff. But evolving towards where all have the same rights. So when we live in a country where everyone has a right to practice whatever lifestyle they want, then we must protect all of those lifestyles. We cannot just promote one, especially if they're just a tiny fraction of society. It's not fair to the bigger wholes. But it does not mean that the rights of that small, that small population should not be protected, just like they were a big group. We all have the right to live and let live in the United States of America, and that's what we strive for and aim for. But just because we tolerate certain lifestyles, because we live in this country where we have to accept everyone, does not mean that we have to accept those ideals and those principles for ourselves and our children. Because when you do it the other way, then that is now reversed oppression. These debates, I hope, will evolve into a dialogue at a time where Christians and Muslims, who have so much in common, need to stand together to protect their values, their lifestyles, and what they want to teach their children. I want to remind everyone of some important history before I get into some of the clips that I found to be disturbing at times during this debate, and I'll play the audio and kind of give you my opinion on that. First and foremost, I want to remind everyone that's watching this that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam are called the Abrahamic faiths because they all believe in the prophet Abraham, the prophet Moses, the 10 Commandments. God knew that we were kind of dumb, so he kind of gave us 10 rules. He said, you know what? We got 10 rules for you. Follow these 10 rules, and things on earth will be pretty decent. Don't kill each other. Don't sleep with each other's wives. Don't commit idolatry. Don't make images of thy Lord. You can pull them up, the 10 Commandments. I want to refresh everyone's memory that before Muhammad and before Jesus Christ, peace be upon all of them, Moses came with those laws, and those laws haven't changed. In all three of those religions, there's no way to justify killing or murdering or any of that stuff. In all three of those faiths, the only way you have a right to take life is if you are defending your own, if you're under attack. And that's no different for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Now, the speaker that I'm going to pull up was on the Patrick, Bet David podcast, and he started just rambling all this stuff. Muhammad was a pedophile. He was this, he was that. He was a warrior. He did this, he did that, he did this. And again, feeding into the negativity and the same classic attacks on the religion of Islam that have been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years. But I'm about to dispel a lot of myths, so stay tuned. This is not about pushing what I believe or anyone believes, but it's about being fair to the truth. And I hope that by dispelling these rumors and this negative talk towards Islam or Christianity, that we can be the ones who bring them together to stand up against what's coming for everyone, whether they're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. I want to remind the Muslims that may be watching this and the Christians of a beautiful story. And during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he was attacked by his own family, his own tribe. They wanted to wipe him and the first Muslims out completely. The reason for this is he was bringing monotheism, the belief in one God, for those of you that don't know what that word means. And the Arabs of that time that lived in Mecca, which is in present-day Saudi Arabia, were worshiping many gods, building statues, images, and all that stuff. And they also used the Mecca city, the Kaaba as it's known, as a place to store these idols, and pilgrims would come from the pagan tribes, and it was all about business, and he was counterproductive to that business, and they wanted him out for challenging their faiths and their pagan way of life. During those early years in Islam, the first Muslims were oppressed significantly by their fellow family members, their tribe members, different clans. There were Jewish tribes that were not Arab. Well, they were Arab, but they were Jewish in faith, that also lived in and around those lands. During that time of repression of the first Muslims, the Prophet Muhammad ordered them to go to the kingdom of Abyssinia. Abyssinia today is present-day Ethiopia. And he commanded them to go there so that they would find shelter from the oppression that they were suffering in Mecca and Medina during that time period. And if we just pull up some simple notes here, the migration to Abyssinia, also known as the first Hijra, was an episode in the early history of Islam where the first followers of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, known as the Sahaba, or also known as his companions, migrated from Arabia due to their persecution by the Quraysh. The Quraysh was the tribe, the most powerful tribe of the Arabs during the time of the Prophet Muhammad. The ruling Arab tribal confederation of Mecca, they sought and were granted refuge in the kingdom of Aksum, an ancient Christian state that was situated in modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, also known as Abyssinia. The ruling Aksumite monarch who received them is known in the Islamic sources as the Najashi, the Negus of the kingdom. That's the word in English. You've probably seen those funny videos where they do the spelling bee and it sounds like the word you shouldn't say, but that's not the word. It's N like Nancy, E like Edward, G like Green, U-S. Modern historians have alternately identified him with the Aksumite king Arma and Ella Tassam. So, in a nutshell, guys, what happened was the first Muslims were hunted down. The Prophet told them to go to this king. He's a righteous Christian king. They found refuge in that kingdom. They were living their lives peacefully there amongst the Christian nation. And then the Arabs that were pagan and trying to hunt down and destroy the first Muslims sent a mission to this kingdom to try and get those early Muslims out of that kingdom so that they could be executed, tortured, or whatever the case may be. They went before the king. They threw every type of slander at them. They don't believe in Jesus Christ. They don't believe in this. They actually make fun of your religion. These were the attacks that they were throwing to try to get the king, who was a righteous king, loved by every Muslim in the world, to hand over these first followers of the Prophet Muhammad so that they would be destroyed. And when the king heard them talk of how they believe in Jesus Christ, how they believe he's the Messiah, how they believe in the Virgin Mary, how they believe in all of his miraculous miracles, how they believe he will come back towards the end of time to fight the Antichrist, just like Christians believe. And he heard a few verses of the Quran speaking about Jesus Christ. He told the Arabs that were trying to take back the Muslims to be destroyed that I will not release these men to you. I find nothing wrong with them, and we have a very small difference in opinion. We have more in common. This is the beautiful history of Christianity and Islam that should be delivered. Yet most Christians and most Muslims either A, don't discuss this, or have forgotten this beautiful story, that if this king did not do what he did, maybe Islam would not be here today. This story of Christianity and Islam is very important. And they like to use the Quran and pull out verses, do this, do that, do this. It's all out of context. And were there times where there was war and battles and stuff? Yes, and we can get into some of that too, but in context. I want to play some of the clips, but before I do that, I just want to remind you, Christians and Muslims and Jews are brothers, sisters, cousins, whatever you want to call them. They all claim to believe in the God of Abraham, Adam and Eve, Noah of the Ark. Muslims and Christians believe in the Virgin Mary, peace be upon her. There's a whole chapter about her in the Quran. She has her own chapter. They believe in her miraculous birth. And no true Muslim or Christian or Jew could ever kill any human being, even if they're not Muslim or Christian, and not worry about the consequences that they will face when they meet God on the day of judgment. In this debate, there was a lot that was said, so let's try to unpack some of this, and I will do my best. So I'm going to play some clips, and then we'll kind of get into some of the commentary here that I found to be disturbing, because it's classical anti-Muslim rhetoric and bias. And it really was not constructive to uniting two of the biggest groups in the world. You know, Muslims and Christians is half the world, guys. We need to find a way to bring these groups together. I do blame a lot on the kings, sultans, politicians of their times. That's what they were. The Pope, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. These are people who maybe did not operate under true Christianity and true Islam, when you really get into the history of it. So I don't want to hear about this back and forth stuff, because you can do it both ways. And it does not mean that these people have lived up to the doctrine or the principles and essence of either of these religions. And here we go, folks.
For man to beat his wife. It's in the Quran. It's the word of Allah himself. Again, when I studied the life of Muhammad, in 10 years, he waged 83 wars in 10 years, 27 wars and 56 raids in 10 years. And you are going to teach me that Islam is peaceful? No, it's not peaceful. Are you going to give a Nobel Prize for somebody who waged 83 wars? No, you will not. And another thing, Muhammad is not a role model. Jesus is. Muhammad, he had many wives, 11 of them. One of them, she was 9 years old. He was 53. I am 50. I cannot marry a girl that has 9 years old. You cannot. That's abuse. And Muhammad did that.
Can we do one issue at a time?
Let me finish this. He raided a Jewish tribe. He killed the whole family of a newly bride called Safiya. And he took her as a wife the same time he was returning to Medina. Would you put that as a role model for me today in the 21st century? He had another wife called Rihanna. My daughter, her name is Rihanna. I named her specifically for that. He took a Jewish wife, Rihanna, and he did sex with her. Not with her will. He did against their wills. All these ladies. Are you going to put him as a role model? You cannot compare Jesus with Muhammad. Jesus never killed a person. He never killed an apostate. He never waged a war. So he was a role model for me. That's why I loved Muhammad and I wanted to follow Jesus. They are going to keep trying, bring the Old Testament. Name one person that Jesus killed because he was an apostate. Judas, he gave him to the Jews, and he never ordered his disciples to kill him. I have people who just criticized Muhammad once, and he ordered his disciples to go and kill him, even lying. His name is Ka'b ibn al-Ashraf. He's a Jewish guy. They killed him. They lied to him. They took him and they killed him. He even encouraged a guy who was blind. He killed his wife. She had 2 kids, and he killed her. He came to the prayer and he said, Muhammad praised the guy for killing his own wife just because she criticized Muhammad. So these are the rules that they want to apply today. If we criticize Muhammad, we should be killed. Like what happened with Charlie Hebdo. Do you think those people, they just killed the people who drew the caricature for Muhammad just because like that? No, because it's written in Islam that they should kill people who criticize Muhammad. So Islam is a big problem. Even the 5% can kill whole humanity.
There you go. I mean, just that comment right there shows you that this debate was not constructive to bringing Muslims and Christians together. I don't know if Patrick Bet-David really did his homework on who he was bringing on the show. I really feel like he could have picked better people, scholars, instead of people that just ramble on, ramble on, ramble on. Give us facts. Give us sources. Put things into context before you just ramble stuff out, because you're doing catastrophic damage. Neither of these religions are going anywhere. And this type of rhetoric is only going to fuel hatred between the groups. And it's just unacceptable. Getting back to some of what he said. First and foremost, a classic way that non-Muslims try to attack the character of the Prophet Muhammad. They claim he married a 9-year-old. He slept with kids. First and foremost, people should go read about his life. Go read about his life. Study his history. His first wife and only wife while she was still alive was 20 years older than him. If he was into young chicks, he would have went with that from the beginning, but he didn't. His first wife, Khadija, was 20 years his senior. Number 2, these Arab tribes that always attacked his character and who he is and called him an evil magician and all kinds of names, never once called him a pedophile or someone that wants to sleep with minors. And that would have been low-hanging fruit if it was not the norm. And I don't say it was norm because, first of all, no one knows at what age he consummated that marriage. I am born and raised in America. My family comes of Albanian descent. I know of plenty of Albanians who were engaged before they were even born. And many cultures throughout Europe, India, Asia, arranged marriages were the way of life many, many years ago. A lot of these practices have come to end, but in a lot of cultures, people promised their daughter to other families and vice versa. He likes to point out things that also apply to Christian history. First and foremost, I want you to ask yourselves a question. You're looking at the world 1400 years ago from the point and the perspective of 2023. Much has changed in the world since then. Lifespans have increased. The roles of men and women have changed in many ways, and they're trying to take it to like ridiculous places, in my opinion, with these gender roles and all these different titles. But getting back to the core argument here, he claims that the Prophet was a pedophile. If he was a pedophile, they would have attacked his character at that time. Just because he was in an arranged marriage with someone that was considered young by today's standards, we have to look at the whole picture here. Otherwise, ignorance breeds hatred and disrespect for an entire community. 1 out of 5 people is Muslim, 1 out of 5 people is Christian. We need to address these issues to find the common ground. First and foremost, in the old world, when a woman had her period, she was considered a woman. Jewish people still have bar mitzvahs today. It's when a boy turns 13. Is he ready to get married? But no, thousands of years ago, that's when they got married. In the old world, they determined a woman was ready for marriage when she had her menstrual cycle. Once she was able to have her menstrual cycle, she was considered biologically able to have a child. Therefore, she was eligible to be a mother and a wife. First and foremost, why do people, for example, celebrate Sweet 16s in America? Why do they dress up all beautiful and do this party? It was really a tradition that started by showing people, hey, my daughter's ready to get married. She's 16 years old, which is the legal age across the country. Most states, 16 is the age of consent. Most of you would never allow your daughter to get married today at the age of 16. You'd probably want to break the guy's head. And God forbid she came home pregnant. But in the old days, 16 years old in the U.S., we threw a party to show everyone, my daughter is now of age to be courted, to be married. Most people got married in the younger part of their lives, not waiting until their 30s and 40s like today. Second of all, in the Latino culture, we have something called the quinceañera. So if we look at the quinceañera, and I can pull up clips here, the quinceañera is the Latino community, their daughters, age 15, they literally dress them up like brides. All their friends and cousins dress up like with bridesmaids dresses. And they basically reenact what a wedding looks like without the groom, because they were also signaling to the world and to the public, my daughter's 15. She's now of the age to be courted for marriage. It was a way to tell the public, my daughter is now a woman. Would any of you allow your daughters to get married at 15? I sure as hell wouldn't. That's really weird. But then where did these customs come from? Because it was considered normal 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, for a woman, once she reached the age of puberty, to be married. There is no one that can prove the prophet slept with this woman before she reached the biological age, which was considered normal, not only for where he lived, across the board in the world, for a woman to be married. And this is the argument that I make. No one's denying that she was promised at a young age, but the marriage was never consummated until she was considered biologically a woman during that time period. If you study Christian history, the Virgin Mary was considered to be between 12 and 14 years old when she conceived Jesus Christ. Would any of you allow your daughter to get married and pregnant at the age of 12 to 14? No, you would want to really hurt the person that did that to your daughter. Does that mean de facto God, the Father, is a pedophile? No. So you make these attacks towards the Prophet Muhammad when you're throwing stones while living in a glass house. The way of the world in the ancient days was simple. When a woman had her menstrual cycle, she was considered to be of the age of birthing children. Therefore, she was married off. Many times it was in arranged marriages, and it's not just in the Arab culture, the Jewish culture, the Indian culture, the Albanian culture, the Turkish culture, throughout the world. And many of the laws in the United States of America changed recently. I believe it was New York State that the age of marriage could be 13. They changed it. Or you guys can Google this stuff. Some of the youngest ages of marriage in the U.S. was 13. Look it up. It doesn't mean it's right or it makes sense in today's world. But most of the world, up until about 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 100 years ago, when a woman reached the age of puberty, then she was handed off in marriage. So people, especially Christians, need to stop this attack on the Prophet Muhammad's character when this was the way of the world across the board. And I'll challenge anyone to a debate, any place, any time, publicly about this matter. Your proofs again, quinceañera, bar mitzvahs, Sweet 16s. There's a reason why these traditions exist, but you guys never asked, why do we do it? Oh, let's just do a Sweet 16 party. It was to show the world, my daughter is ready to be courted for marriage. That's the origins of these parties that everyone does. It's not about renting a banquet hall and having fun and dancing. No, it was to show the world symbolically, your community, my daughter is of the age of marriage. So I ask yourselves, when you celebrate a quinceañera or you celebrate a Sweet 16, are you telling the world now that your daughter's ready to get married? No, but you're still continuing that tradition, and that's where it comes from. So this attack on the Prophet Muhammad needs to stop, because it is not a valid argument. Like I said, pull up any Christian encyclopedia. The Virgin Mary is between 12 and 14 years old when she was impregnated by the Word of God. For that to be the attack on the Prophet Muhammad would mean that in their faith that the Father Almighty is also a pedophile. Stop it already. Now that that one's dispelled, let's bring more unity and love between these two communities. Let's continue with what this guy has to say.
Can I have a response?
Sure, please go for it, Jake.
And I want to comment on what he said, and also Robert's.
Now, this is the Muslim guy responding to some of this.
Endorsing the punishment for apostasy. Yes, we do. Why? Because our claim is that we are actually faithful to our scriptures. You guys are not. You want to avoid the Old Testament, and I want to give you an analogy, Patrick, because you're a business guy. You have many businesses, okay? And you have policies that you have to put in place based on social interaction in the workplace and all that kind of stuff. Now, you may make amendments to those policies based on new data, new information, how things are actually going based on those things that you put in place. Now, when you do, right, and this is the analogy between the Old Testament and the New Testament, are you willing to say that, well, yeah, thinking to myself, yeah, Pat, yeah, you were wrong, actually, when you said it was okay to do such and such. That was actually wrong, and you then put in the correct one. With the Bible, the problem that you have is the same one that you want to talk about, the loving Jesus Christ himself, which we also adore and respect as a prophet, is the same one that you believe is God and revealed the Old Testament, and you can't get out of that. So when your God, Jesus, revealed at that specific time, as I just read the passage, and I can read you plenty more, where he says to kill babies in war. Is it okay to target infants in war and kill babies? Is that inherently immoral? The problem that you have is if you go on, and this is why the argument is so important. It's not a tu quoque just as a fallacious argument. It's checking for your consistency as a Christian, whether or not you're actually faithful to your own text and tradition. And the reality is you're not. Why? You have two options. If you condemn it as inherently immoral, then the whole Bible's gone. Because if you believe that those verses in the Bible were revealed by God, then you're saying that God is immoral. And on the other hand, if you say that it's not inherently immoral, but God changed the law at this time, then most of your arguments lose the force that they have against Islam, because you can no longer argue that it is inherently immoral to punish an apostate by death and all of the other things that you want to tack on. This is why it's so important. It's not a fallacious argument, and the reality is we want to stick to our text and our tradition, and for the most part, we would argue that the Christians have abandoned them in favor of secular, liberal, moral ideologies.
Let me have Daniel respond, and then I'll come to you. Go for it.
Again, these debates back and forth, counterproductive. These debates, I think they should have started off with showing all the similarities, what they have in common, and then if they wanted to continue these debates about what they have different, I don't feel that these debates are fair to either faith, in my opinion. And some would even argue that some of these debates can be harmful. I feel a strong need that there needs to be more qualified people having these discussions. People like Hamza Yusuf, people who understand all the faiths intensely, that really studied them, and not just screaming out accusations. I want to move on to the next guy. There's a clip here. He also had some stuff to say, and I'd like to talk about it.
But there's a great deal more that Daniel mentioned. Am I going to get a chance?
You can respond right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
The problem that you guys have is that you're reading the Bible as if it were the Quran. In the Quran, it's dictated. Allah dictated every word, and it's applicable for all time. It's all flattened out and on the same level. The Bible is simply not like that. In the first place, you have the very simple notation of the Gospels, the Gospel according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, in the Christian faith, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were inspired, but that doesn't mean that God was dictating to them and that it was beyond their human understanding. Like when St. Paul, in one of his letters, and he says, I'm glad I didn't come to baptize any of you. Well, actually, I did baptize a couple people, and I forget who else, but I still didn't come to baptize. It's not that God is forgetting who he baptized and who he didn't, but Paul is working from his human understanding, and yet he is speaking the truths, the eternal truths that God wants him to communicate. A lot of the Bible is the record of the evolving understanding of the people of God about precisely precisely a lot of these issues that you're talking about. And so you can't go back and flatten it out as if it were the Quran and say, Jesus is here telling people to kill people, and therefore you have to approve of it.
Well, Jesus is
That's
God.
just not how the Bible works. What you have is an understanding that the people had at that time that's expressed in that way, and then later, because of the teachings that Jesus gives in the New Testament primarily, of the dignity of the universal dignity of the human person and various other aspects of the understanding of humanity. That's why slavery is abolished, and slavery was only abolished in Christian contexts, primarily in the UK and the United States to start with, and then it followed around the world, because people understood, even though slavery is in the Bible and in the New Testament, yes, at the same time, also, there's the idea that all people are made in the image of God and have that dignity. So there's not the dichotomy like in the Quran, Muhammad is the apostle of Allah, those who follow him are merciful to one another, ruthless to the unbelievers, at chapter 48, verse 29. So it was Christian clerics in the UK and the United States who led the fight to abolish slavery based on the deeper Christian principles regarding the dignity of the human person.
Yeah, so why can't evolve? Why can't Christians evolve to accept transgender and drag queen story? Or why can't things evolve even more?
Actually,
what's the
because
principle?
of the same,
what's the principle?
I talk about this a little bit. First and foremost, they always try to paint Islam as if it was spread by the sword. Was there battles? Was there violence? Yes. I beg you to study the history of Islam and then compare it to the history of Christianity, which is not my objective. Guys, I went viral for making a video that showed everyone that Muslims, Christians, and Jews have the same exact word for God. You may have seen that video, has billions and billions of views. The word for God in the Jewish religion is Elohim, the plural form, or Ilah. In Aramaic is Allah, in Arabic is Allah. It's something that's known as a cognate. These are Semitic languages. All three religions have the same word for God. It's not a name. What drives me crazy is that they always try to paint Islam as this violent religion that conquers and does all this stuff. Let's really look at the hard facts here. I don't think there's another religion on earth that can claim that level of conquering and converting people to their religion than the Christian faith. And I say it respectfully. Anywhere the Christian empires went, let's start with right here in the United States of America, where we live. Okay? From the New World, when Christopher Columbus set foot here on the southern continent and North America, some of the historians have estimated from the minute Christopher Columbus stepped foot on the New World, from that time period until the 1900s, right? Maybe 200 to 500 million people were wiped out. The Native American population, the Native South American population, nothing remained of their language, nothing remained of their religion. These were Mayans and Incans and all that. They were wiped out, handed blankets full of smallpox. You want to talk about killing Jews? The Muslims never had a Holocaust. Germany is a Christian country. Christian country. You want to talk about killing Jews? The Inquisition, which some say was even worse than the Holocaust, where anyone who was even suspected of being a Jew was executed and tortured to death. And people that weren't even Jewish were arrested and they had to confess they were a Jew, and then they were killed. And they were confessed under duress because they were being tortured to death. This happened in European history. So we need to put things into context. Now, do I think that that's Christianity that taught those people to do that? No, I want to clarify here. I do not believe that any one of these religions ever taught their followers to go kill Christians, Jews, or Muslims, or vice versa. But people that were given positions of authority used the faith as a political tool. I do not blame the religion. My family was murdered by Orthodox Christians in 1998. They were killed by Serbian paramilitary and police in the Republic of Kosovo. They were massacred. I lost 30 people in one day. There's videos. We just had an attack and 2 days ago in Kosovo, and the guys that committed the terrorism, they crossed the border with heavy explosives, all kinds of crazy shit. They ended up killing an Albanian police officer, patrolling Kosovo's borders, and then they drove a truck into the Serbian monastery. I still don't believe the teachings of Jesus. I still don't blame the teachings of Jesus Christ or Christianity for that violence. I don't blame Christianity for why my family was killed in 1998. I don't blame Christianity for why 500,000 Bosnians were massacred by the Serbians. I don't blame those religions. I blame people not truly understanding those religions, not learning from Jesus Christ, not learning from Muhammad, to not oppress and not be oppressed. For every action, there's a reaction. And political influences that deviated from these religions. And a lot of these leaders throughout history are going to have a lot to talk about with God on that day. If you truly understand Christianity and Islam, there is no room to oppress people or massacre them or kill them. I'm asking you to study. I don't have time. It took me 25 years to learn what I know. But I'm simply pointing out the hypocrisy of one argument against another when their house is a glass house and they're trying to throw some big rocks. Anywhere the Muslims went to this day, for the most part, some people argue Kosovo. I have an argument for that, in Albania. For the most part, wherever Muslim empires went, the population remained the religion that they were. Study the history of Andalusia in Spain. When the Moors of Morocco conquered Spain, which technically they shouldn't have invaded Spain, but this back and forth between Christians and Muslims goes against both doctrines, if you really break it down. But wherever the Muslims controlled, they never forced the population to convert. I don't want to hear about ISIS and terrorists and all this other shit and wars that should have never started because of my country that I live in right now. I'm talking about throughout history. Today, Spain is still one of the most Catholic countries in the world, even though the Moors and the Muslim Empire controlled it for hundreds of years. My question to you watching is, where did the Christians ever go that any of the people that were not Christian remained that religion? I'm not talking about modern history. I'm talking about throughout history. The New World, none of them remained. Genocide, wiped out, taken off the face of the planet, first to change their names, forced into concentration camps called reservations. Their native languages were wiped out. Their culture was wiped out. Their religions were destroyed. Same thing happened to African Americans. Some estimates say up to half, even 70% of the first slaves brought to America, African Americans, the majority of them were Muslim. Go watch Roots with Kunta Kinte, and he's praying in the one scene. And then the guy comes, don't you be praying to no Allah. Don't you be praying, because if the master see you pray to Allah. So it's not about trying to show which religion is evil or wrong, but this guy has no right to ever claim that Islam is violent compared to the history of Christianity. Holocaust started by a Christian country. Inquisition, Christian history. Hunting down Jews. The Muslims, in reality, if most Jews are being fair to their history, will see that for the most part, the Jews always ran and fled to the Muslim lands, just like they did after World War II. Just like during World War II, Albania, which is a Muslim, a majority Muslim country, was the only country in Europe to save all of its Jewish refugees. If we're being fair, if we're telling history for what it is. We can all spew allegations and hatred. Sounds like a lot of these guys have bias because of their childhoods, the environments that they grew up under, dictators, which many of the dictators in the world that control the Muslim country, most Muslims will say there's not a single Muslim leader in the world, that none of them are true to the ideals of Islam, that they can say they're practicing Sharia law, but they're not, when you really look at the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions. This is a lot of history and a lot of facts and a lot of knowledge that you must do your homework on. You can't take quotes out of the Quran. He quotes certain things, like Islam tells you to kill Christians and Jews. No, it does not. The Quran came down over the course of 20-something years. Depending what was happening at that time, revelation came to the Prophet. Again, this is what Muslims believe. So there was a tribe who betrayed the Prophet Muhammad. They had an alliance. They made a treaty. They said, we're not going to fight, because he was being attacked by all his different clans. His own family was trying to kill him. So he had alliances. And from what we understand, this tribe broke the alliance. So it's once we make an oath, it's like, hey, me and you ain't going to fight. But if we break this, then there's no more peace between us. He was betrayed by that tribe, and then they were eliminated. Because how could you ever trust someone that broke the alliance with you, helped your enemies to try to wipe you out? It's like if me and you were fighting, we say, we're not going to fight no more. No, okay, cool. You're not going to help people fight me and kill me? No, okay, cool. And if you break that alliance, now you're my enemy. The reality of life is war exists, and it has to be dealt with. But there's rules in Islam. You can't kill captives. Most of the first converts to Islam were prisoners of war because they were treated so well. Prisoners have rights. People want to talk about captives and slavery. This is a reality of the world. Slavery still exists today in different forms. Children and women trafficked all over the world. Where is everybody? Where are the Christians and the Muslims? And people will say, well, this is why I don't believe in God. And you know what? If I watched these debates and I wasn't a spiritual person, and if I didn't really do my homework, I'd have a hard time believing in God too. If I saw these two groups going at it like that, I'd say, this is why I don't believe in religion. But God gave you the tools to read, to study, to feel, to look for the truth. And that could be Christianity or Islam for you, or Judaism or Buddhism or whatever you want to choose. But most people don't even look. Most people don't even know 1% of any of these doctrines. And they want to round them up, or their experience and their faith was negative, or their father was bad and he said, I do this because of my religion. Meanwhile, his father didn't follow the religion. So I would say to you, we are suffering from mass ignorance in a time where technology is at our fingertips. We are suffering from a time where people don't question the source of their information and where it's coming from. We live in a time where people just consume content and food without even knowing what's in it, where it's coming from, what it could possibly do to them, because information is the most powerful thing we have. And if you don't question sources, where you're getting information from, what makes them qualified to speak about it, and you should question everything I've said on this video, because consuming information can affect your opinion, your beliefs. It's like the movie Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio, where just one idea gets planted into your mind can change your whole entire life. So you should question everything I'm talking about here. You should question everything they're talking about. You should look for sources and proof if this is subject matter that's important to you. But I find it to be very counterproductive in a discussion that I would hope would lead to unity, because all Christians and Muslims believe Jesus is the Messiah, born from the Virgin Mary. Thou shalt not kill. You should have mercy. Women do have rights in Islam. As a matter of fact, most historians would state that Islam was the first major faith in the world to really give women rights. The Prophet Muhammad's first love, and the one he stayed with the longest, right, until she passed away, his true love, who was older than him, she was a businesswoman. He didn't have a problem with her doing business. A lot of people mistake cultural ideology for the philosophy of Islam. And like I said, there's so much more to talk about. And this is just my first response video, and maybe not my best because it's just off the cuff, no notes, and I'm just kind of commenting on all of this. But there's a lot I want to go into about this subject matter, and I think I'm going to start responding more to these types of videos. And again, going back to the whole attacking the character of the Prophet Muhammad. First period for females. Puberty often begins at around 11 years old, although anywhere between 8 and 14, which means even if they're claiming she was 9 years old, based on the doctrine of the world, when a woman had her period, she was at the age of marriage. She very well fell within that, but no one really knows when he consummated the marriage. Like I said, even in my culture, people got engaged before they were even born. I know of people whose grandparents, like there was two women, they were friends or from two different tribes or two different families, and they're both pregnant at the same time. And they said, if I have a boy and you have a girl or vice versa, let's promise them to each other. They were engaged before they were even born in arranged marriages, which was very common throughout most of the world. You had to go through family and clan and men to arrange these marriages. So trying to look at the world 1,400 years ago, 2,100 years ago, out of context, of course it's going to look odd. Of course it's going to look weird. Of course you can paint it to make it look like these people are crazy and evil. But it's not. It was the norm in that world and those civilizations. So, that's my argument here. We can take things out of context, a couple sentences, take a couple quotes out of the Bible, take a couple quotes out of the Quran, and make everyone look evil. And all that wins here is people that don't believe in God, agnostic people, people who are pushing to secularize the world, because we can't get people that are educated enough to sit down and be fair. The only difference between a Christian and a Muslim is who Jesus Christ was. Was he God or was he just a prophet? Other than that, their doctrine is very similar. What they're supposed to stand for is similar. What they're supposed to believe in is very similar. Family, God, country, morals, respect, no adultery, none of this stuff. Right? They all have the same rules to purify the soul. And all three of those religions will make you a better person if you follow the doctrine. Like I said, I never blamed Christianity for what happened to my family. Ever. But I just wish that non-Christians would give Islam, because let's be real, the negativity towards Islam was exploded after 9/11. We don't look at policies that helped create a lot of this shit. And it's just horrific where the world's come, and it's becoming secular. More and more people are just not believing in God anymore. And that's why these debates and this stuff is important, but it's got to be done right. Otherwise, we just push everyone away from believing in God. And in a time where morality, family unit is being attacked, it is important that Muslims and Christians come together, and the Jews, to preserve the family unit, to preserve morality and things that are important to those religions. You guys have more in common, and right now you guys all have the same people against you. So I think the time to unite is now for Muslims, Christians, and Jews. I don't care how you look at Jesus. We both love him. And if we both love him, then we know we can't kill each other. And I can go into this a little bit more. Like I said, it's my first episode addressing this topic. Forgive me if I made any mistakes. Only God is perfect. Please do your homework. Never just consume information. Please write notes when you watch things like this, and then go back and do your homework. Do your research. Ask a Muslim. Ask a Christian that knows what they're talking about, that is qualified, that has studied the history, and not just people that are going, or have bias because of their childhood, which clearly I think Brother Rashid had. In any event, I look forward to doing more of these. God bless everyone. May God bring peace to the earth. May Jesus Christ return for Muslims and Christians. This is Beck Lever, and you're watching My 2 Cents.